Howdy, folks. Thanks for tuning in for another cruise with Smooth. Hope y'all doing okay today. Man, I tell you. So, the last time y'all caught me, I was driving a Ford EcoSport. Not a bad little vehicle. Wasn't my personal favorite thing I've ever driven, far from the worst. New vehicle wise, anyway. Well, when dealers sell vehicles as demos, they have to have less than 5,000 miles to be sold as a new demo vehicle. Now, there is a discount you get for that, but 5,000 miles is the cap. So when I picked up that EcoSport, they said, here you go, just make sure it's back to us before 5,000 miles. Cool, I can do that. It had 4,100 miles on it. I have a sizable commute to and from work. And didn't take me long to get close enough that I wouldn't be able to make another trip. So yesterday I went and swapped out for something different. And you gotta understand, my focus gets between 35 and 40 on the highway. So that's what I'm used to getting. Well, the EcoSport got 30, 33-ish, so not a huge drop. They put me in an F-150. Now, they put me in like the second most efficient engine that they put in an F-150, but it's still a 4,800 pound, 5,000 pound truck. I love this darn thing. And I'm getting like 22 miles a gallon. It's fantastic. It rides and drives like a truck, which not everybody likes trucks, but get on your side of the road, please, 18-wheeler. But, I love it. It's not four-wheel drive, it's two-wheel drive with locking rear diff. It's got the baby EcoBoost for the F-150. The little 2.7 liter twin turbo. 355 rear end ratio. 10-speed automatic, which at interstate speeds puts it spinning less than 2,000 RPMs. I had it up to about 80 yesterday, and it wasn't spinning $2,000. It's geared taller than my Mustang, which everybody says that's got airplane gears. Because at 80 miles an hour, that car's spinning just over $2,000. It's got the Android CarPlay or Android CarPlay, Apple CarPlay. It's got the touchscreen auto start stop. It's kind of a weird mix of stuff because it's got some of the higher end tech options, but no power seats, none of the fancy options on the mirrors, no nothing like that. So it's an odd option package, but I really like it. I like it so much. It was funny, my wife and I, we went to pick this thing up together. I had to drive her, I didn't have to drive her anywhere, but I went with her to go take care of some of her pre-employment paperwork. She's starting another job soon, and I went with her because I was off and I didn't have anything to do, so I was just spending time with my wife. And when we went to pick it up, she's like, you know what they're doing? I'm like, oh, I know exactly what this is. She's like, they put people in new vehicles in hopes that they'll be interested in wanting to buy them. I'm like, I know. Both of us used to work sales. Both of us know I'm not trying to cast a bad light on salespeople, but we know how the games go and how their processes work. So none of it's a surprise, but it's the dealership I used to work at years ago, the one I still do business with. And I decided that I was going to message the salesman, since this vehicle will have miles on it by the time it gets turned back, because it has 3,000 miles on it when I picked it up.
so it's going to have mileage on it by the time it gets back to him. I just asked him, just for curiosity's sake, how much this would run. You know, if I could get rid of my Focus and possibly trade in the old F-150 that I've got. I don't podcast on that much. It's a loud old truck, and it's nasty. But if I could get this and get rid of two vehicles and just get one that would do more things, it might be a win. I don't know. I know the sticker on this thing is twice what I paid for my Focus, but I don't know. So just kicking the idea around. I doubt it's going to work, but who knows? If it does, it does. If it doesn't, it doesn't. I'm not going to be upset either way. I'll just drive something that gets 35 to 40 miles a gallon. But I just love the way this thing rides and drives. The power is really impressive out of something so small. When I first got in it, I didn't have time to do nothing because we were on a touch of a timetable. So when I got in it, I had to just kind of jump in and go. Took my wife to her appointment. We met up with one of her friends for lunch where we were, and I made a wrong turn on a ramp. I was getting ready to take a toll bridge out of state, and I didn't want to do that, and I got in the wrong lane. So I had to, we'll just leave it at make an interesting driving maneuver to get where I needed to go. And it involved some brisk acceleration, and I thought I was in the biggest, most powerful engine that Ford puts in these trucks. Now, I will say that it's two-wheel drive, so you lose a little weight there. It's got the short bed, well, medium length bed, I think, so you lose a little weight there. And it's got the extended cab, not the full Super Crew with the full four doors that open the way they do. It's got the clamshell doors where you got to open the front door, then you open the back door. So I realize that it is lighter than some full-size trucks, but good golly, this thing will pack up and move. And the response is just instant out of the turbos. I understand the science behind it, but I don't understand how they got it that good. I mean, it's just incredible. It makes power everywhere in the RPM band. It'll accelerate in 10th gear. It's just an impressive feat of engineering. Now, I realize that, you know, Ford has had their teeth cutting problems. Like, okay, right now I'm in 10th gear, accelerating to 60. The engine is spinning 1300 RPM, going up a hill and holding speed. And now I'm cresting the hill and I'm picking up speed again. And 60. So I realize that Ford's had their issues cutting their teeth on these. They had some issues with the little 1.6 liter EcoBoost. They had some block issues where they got bad castings out of the 2 liter EcoBoost recently. They've had coolant consumption issues out of the 1.6. They had fire hazard issues out of the 1.6. All this is kind of early production run stuff. The 1 liters, when they brought them out in the UK, they had a bunch of problems, which that's, you know, what I've got in the Focus. But they continued to revise them and make them better as they continued production. So, you know, it wasn't you weren't stuck buying the exact same thing over and over and over again. And when Ford first brought out the EcoBoost engine, the EcoBoost torture test that they did for the F-150, because I'll admit, I'm a Ford nut. No shame in that. But when they announced that they were going to be putting the first EcoBoost engine into the F-150, I was a skeptic, because the first EcoBoost engine came into production in the Taurus show, and a couple other Lincoln vehicles, but that's
where it was the Taurus Show, I believe, was the first. Well, anyway, they brought it out, big, comfortable, zippy, all-wheel drive performance sedan. Okay, cool enough. We're going to put that same engine in a truck. I'm like, wait, what? And my thought process was, you're adding 1,000 to 1,500 pounds worth of weight to an engine to make it pack around all the time. You're cranking the torque up a lot compared to what it was in the show. And you are going to give it a towing capacity of over 10,000 pounds. The first generation EcoBoost F-150 would tow 11.3. So my thought process was, you guys are nuts. That engine's going to have massive issues. And when I say engine, I mean like the base, reciprocating assembly, pistons, crank rods, bearings, valve train, turbos. I was expecting all sorts of problems. Well, Ford decided to prove their engine out. So they ran up 150,000 miles simulated on a dyno with a prolonged oil change interval, just to stress it a little further. So they were giving an idea what they were doing. They were pumping it full of coolant at 40 below and then starting it up and going to wide open throttle while the engine's cold, and they were running high RPM load test, wear testing, where they were running it at and above the maximum RPM the engine will spin in a truck, just to see if they could break it. They ran it at full load and full power, full torque for countless hours. I think they ended up putting 300 or 400 hours on this engine, but they were, being very aggressive on their input, so the engine's, constantly spinning over $4,000. And when they got done, they put it in a truck and did some similar testing in the truck just to see if it would hold up. It outran Dodge and Chevys towing the same weight trailer. They did 24 hours of max tow with it at wide open throttle on a circuit track. They did road trips in the truck. And then to finish it off, they did a Baja course. They lifted it out of that truck, put it in a Baja truck, and sent it down the Baja, and it won in its class in the experimental, and it came in fairly good overall, but you can't really judge that because there's some guys that are running absolute insane builds that are going to, tens of thousands of dollars in an engine. Plus you've got, kind of a one-time use engine. So you can't compare those two apples to apples. But it finished. They ran it back to the dyno. It produced rated horsepower and torque minus 1 horsepower. They did have a valve bucket. It technically what a lifter would be in old term, but a valve bucket had worn slightly, and so they were missing 1 horsepower on top end, but they were making rated torque. I'm not used to driving something so wide all the time. They went and tore it down, and all the base engine components, pistons, crank, bore run out, everything was within new build specifications at what accumulated to be 165,000 miles. So they really built a solid base engine. Now I know that there's problems with them. Give you one case in point example. Ford, on all their vehicles, they recommend like a 90 to 120,000 mile spark plug service interval. They use Iridium plugs. They are good. One of the downsides to turbocharging any engine, I don't care if you're talking about, the manufacturer, an engine that rolled out with a turbo, or, turbocharging an engine later, is you're asking more of each spark plug. So, for example, GM, their big V8 puts out about 420 horsepower in the truck segment over 8 cylinders. Respectable numbers. Ford, they've got a high output version of the 3.5 liter EcoBoost that's right there with it. Over 6 cylinders. Each one of those spark plugs has to ignite a denser charge of fuel and air per cylinder than the GM does. In my EcoBoost, I've got 3 cylinders making 123 horsepower and 147 foot-pounds of torque. So a respectable amount of power out of a package so small. Well, that accelerates the wear on the plugs. So I actually put spark plugs in that engine at about 50 or 60,000 miles. It was developing a slight miss at cold idle. Threw a set of plugs in it, right as rain. So, pardon me. So there are a couple drawbacks to turbocharged engines, just in general. With Ford, everyone always says you get either Eco or Boost. You don't get both. Turbocharged engines, when you do run it at higher throttle input, you actually have to run a richer air-fuel mixture. So you've got whatever efficiency you're picking up by having less cylinders, you've got you lose it whenever you start demanding power out of the engine. So you get power when you need it, economy when you don't. So you get the fuel economy of a V6 truck when you're just putting around, but you get the performance out of a V8 truck when you really need the performance, but your fuel consumption might be even greater. And all that is just to keep the cylinder temperatures low and help prevent knock. The biggest issue that I've seen out of the EcoBoosts is they had an issue where when they weren't driven at high load very often and they were just used as commuter vehicles, the intercooler would collect condensation, and then when you commanded torque or high power output, you would get a sputter and a cough as the engine started, as the turbos spooled up. It would force the condensation out of the intercooler and choke the engine for a second. Ford put out a TSB and eventually a recall on that and managed to fix it fairly easily. I don't remember what the fix was, but I know that they fixed it. I also know that they had issues with the spark plugs and eventually them wiping out coils. You drive a vehicle too long on bad spark plugs, you end up putting a set of coils in it. Not cheap. I've seen one come in where they had a bad alternator, but that was deemed to be abuse by the dealership. They put the alternators on the 3.5s. I don't know where they put them on 2.7s. They put them down kind of low, in my opinion. And so when you're doing truck stuff off-road, it's easier than it should be, in my opinion, to sling water and dirt and mud and crud into your alternator. And so this guy had a relatively new late model truck that had alternator failure. Bearings were going out on it and it wasn't charging correctly. Now, in any vehicle, you do get some of the trim and fit and finish and all that stuff. I'm not talking about that so much because no matter what engine strategy Ford was going to go with for their new vehicles, you'd always have squeaks and rattles and, you know, interior component failures. So that's not as interesting to me. There are ways to avoid it because you can simplify stuff and take away the bells and whistles. So, you know, pick what you want. You can have all the buttons and all the options in the world, or you can have something that's just going to last forever and you never have to take the dash apart. I know which one I'd pick, but they don't make them that way anymore. Anyway, I also have seen where when you run an extended oil change interval on the 3.5 EcoBoost, that you do get what they call timing change stretch. Essentially, the
joints and the link of the timing chain will wear, and you'll end up over the course, and this is over the course of 100, 150, even 200,000 miles sometimes, you'll end up seeing the chain lengthen by as much as a chain link. And that doesn't sound like a lot, but when you talk about something that, like an engine with exacting tolerances, an interference engine, you can end up it'll throw a check engine light before you end up grenading the motor, typically. You'll get a cam signal correlation code, and you need to put timing chains in it. And it's a big job. You got to take all the accessories out of the front end. You got to take all the timing covers off. And then you got to take the timing chains off and retime the motor when you put the new ones on. So, it's no small job, no lie. But if you change the oil with high quality, preferably synthetic oil, and change it often enough, you typically don't run into those issues. But all that said, I just think it's stinking impressive how much power is being screwed out of this small engine with turbocharging, direct injection. This one has the dual port I think the 2.7, I know the 3.5 went to it and several others, but I think they actually went to direct and port fuel injection. So you get the best of both worlds, where initially on direct fuel injection, and this has been going on since the early to mid 2000s with VW products, they went to direct injection. And one of the issues that they had, sorry folks, I'm getting chilly here. One of the issues that they had is without spraying fuel over the intake valve every intake stroke, you would end up with carbon buildup from the crank vent system. Every engine has a crank vent that feeds back into the intake manifold to burn off those hydrocarbons. That's just a fact. Every intake valve is exposed to those hydrocarbons, and they can carbon up the valves and stick to them. When you run port injection, where the injector's in the intake manifold, every cycle, the injector sprays a tiny pulse of fuel and it cleans the valve. Not a bad thing. When you go with direct injection, there are perks and there are disadvantages to it. One of the perks is you can be a little bit more aggressive with your timing curve because you don't have the full fuel air charge sitting in there. You also have a much finer control over exactly when the fuel gets cut off going into the chamber, exactly how much fuel goes into the chamber, because when you use port injection, some of it does stick to the intake port wall. So there are several advantages to it. One of the disadvantages is you don't get that fuel charge running over the intake valve, so they will carbon up. I've seen them. There's nothing you can do about it. It just happens. There's some cleaning kits that you can use. Some manufacturers use them, some don't. On turbocharged vehicles especially, they recommend you not to do it because you run the risk of overheating the bearings in the turbo and wiping the turbo out, so you rob Peter, pay Paul kind of thing. And you might have perfectly clean intake valves, but you just wiped out your turbocharger. There's other cleaning methods that have come into existence on direct injection since then, but in 2018, I believe, Ford went to that split fuel injection method in several of their engines. They went into it with the 5-liter Coyote so they could raise the compression ratio. They went from 10.5 to 1 all the way up to like 12.5 to 1, I think, which is a very strong compression ratio. They went with it, I know for sure, on the 3.5 EcoBoost. I don't know if they went with it in the 2.7, but I think they did. But regardless, this little engine, I'm cruising along right now 76, 77 miles an hour, spinning 1900 RPMs, and it's just as undramatic as can be. It gets up to speed real easy. When you put your foot in it, it moves. So, not much of a podcast on the current events going on today, but I'm driving a truck. I like it. I wanted to talk about it. I'm a Ford nut. I'll talk about Fords. So, anyway,
real quick while I'm thinking about it. Yesterday, I introduced my wife to pull your own parts junkyards. I'm getting my Mustang tuned next Monday at a dyno tune, or at a performance shop. They've got their own dyno, so it's getting chassis dyno tuned. According to everything I could find out, the one part that I needed was a set of injectors in order to be able to maximize, or get the max out of the setup I've currently got on the car. So I went to a junkyard with my wife yesterday. It was fun. She had never been to one before. We pulled 8 injectors out of cars. Long story short, buddy mine, who is as big a car nerd as I am and as big a wealth of useless information as I am, told me a vehicle I could go for that had injectors that were nearly 50, like 35-40% bigger than the ones I've got. And we went and picked those up. It's a 4-cylinder car, so each cylinder's got to produce more power. It's a little turbocharged engine, talking about all that. And we went and picked up a set of injectors. Right now they're currently sitting in Seafoam to clean all the out of them. I've got them going in on Saturday into the Mustang, and on Monday it's getting, whoa, big 18-wheeler coming right out in front of me. And he's moving at a snail's pace. Sorry about that. Thanks, buddy. Bye. They've got the lane shifted over here. I'm not actually in the emergency lane going around this guy. They've got the lane shifted for construction. Anyway, what was I saying? So I went and pulled those injectors out, and the Mustang's getting dyno tuned. I'll be videoing that, posting it. So stick around if anything like that is your cup of tea. Hope y'all are doing okay. Stay safe. Thanks for tuning in for Cruise O Smooth, getting the Mustang tuned to go from 87 to 93 octane pump gas. I thought about going with race fuel, but I'm not paying $10 a gallon for gas. So with all that said, folks, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for putting up with me being a car nut. Hope y'all stay safe. Talk to you later.